I know there is in fact animals that we don't know about that live among us without us ever knowing their existence. Back in the 90s, when I was going down a long, steep cliff in a ravine in a smaller canyon, I came across a nest of something large. I'll spare you the boring details about my background, but I was traveling down the steep ravine in Northern California on a personal expedition I was doing. I did this kind of stuff all the time, so I knew how to go about it. I came across a small drop-off where I could catch my footing and could also catch my breath. If you walked about 10 feet to your right, it led to this tiny outcropping underneath the rock. From the top of the canyon, or where the cliff that I came from was, you would never be able to even see it because it's almost like looking directly down. It was directly under this outcropping that I saw this giant, well, what I would describe as nest. It looked like a bunch of old branches and other miscellaneous brush that was neatly placed in a large area, big enough for a grizzly bear to sleep in. My mind immediately went to bears, but I know bears don't make nests like this. They also usually make dens in caves, and this was in May. Bears would be out and about in the spring, so that could have been it. Also, there's no way a bear would be able to climb down this steep of a cliff and have no reason for a bear to make a den in this small outcropping. The only thing that makes sense in my mind, which I know sounds insane, is a pterodactyl. It definitely had to be something that can fly, but the nest just didn't make sense. It was so incredibly large that no known bird should live in it. I've been out in the wild enough, and I've seen hawks, falcons, eagles, and other large birds of prey, like even vultures, and I've seen the nests these things make. This nest, however, trumped all of them in size. It was very discernible as some sort of bird nest. Being very intrigued, I took my time and sought after any clues I could find. Any old eggshell fragments, or possibly bones. Buried underneath the brush, I found a couple of old stag bones and a couple of doe skulls. There were a few femur bones here and there, and a few possible rib bones that came from either a cow or a deer, judging by the shape and size. I don't know about you, but I have no idea what birds eat on the remains of a cow or deer. I knew I was dealing with some sort of bird of prey, and after I found those bones, which looked to be very old by the way, maybe it wasn't a good idea that I stuck around as long as I did. I felt like I had a false sense of comfort, because the nest to me felt like it had been abandoned. There is some overgrowth coming from the sides, and brush and branches that the nest was made out of looked unkempt and messed up, and hadn't been laid in or laid on in some time. Then it dawned on me that I believe I discovered a nest of some unknown, large bird of prey. I don't know what kind, and I would certainly not want to meet it, but that's just what I believe. Again, I firmly believe that this is the nest that was no longer in use, but I didn't feel like it was appropriate to stick around longer, just in case I was wrong. With the environment around it, where the nest is and was, it created the perfect getaway hiding spot for whatever large bird made this nest here. No predators or any egg thieves would be able to reach it, and stayed far out of the eyesight or earsight of anyone happening to wander through the area. Had I not glanced over when I caught my footing, I would have gone right past it, down the ravine wall. During my time of expeditions and climbing up and down cliffs, I have found a lot of cool stuff, and this one is hands down the best one. Since you seem to be the expert on cryptids and possible unknown animals, you might have some insight as to what exactly I stumbled upon. I'm going to start this off and let you know that I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. There's no way anybody could hallucinate such a thing. I've already gotten ample disbelief from friends and family who chose not to believe my story, and I guess I can't blame them, having never seen what I did. That's okay though. I just accept that there's more out there than we know, and it's funny. I used to think that we've explored everything there is to explore on this planet, but I guess I was wrong. There are certain creatures that are really good at hiding, because otherwise we would all know about them by now, right? Almost 6 years ago, I was spending some time out in the bayous of Louisiana and western Florida, scouting out some great places to fish. I do all of my adventures soloing. I'm just a very independent person, and I like the solace of being alone. I guess in this case, it worked out against me, because had I had a witness with me, I feel like I would have been that much more credible. Oh well. I reached an open spot that was right near the ocean. The Gulf, actually. It was still very swampy, but you can kind of see the ocean from where I was. It was a spot where the swamp actually kind of opened up inland. I had hiked off the road for quite a few miles in this dense swamp. I didn't have any of my equipment with me, because I was just getting out of location, like I said, just seeing what was around the area. For those that aren't aware of the environment here, it's humid as hell, with alligators and insects everywhere. It can be extremely treacherous if you don't know your environment, and you become too prideful and arrogant. I was under the impression already that I was not in my safe zone, and I needed to tread very lightly. There's also poisonous snakes and other things out here that can kill you or hurt you. I guess you can say that is part of the thrill. Once I reached the open area that the swamp came in inland, I noticed there were quite a few alligators in the water, and a few hanging out on the embankment across from the swamp that I was at. I had to be extremely careful at traversing and treading where I was going. I didn't plan on going into the water at all, even if it only was knee-deep. I wasn't risking anything. I go past my side of the embankment and start to head towards the innermost part of the swamp that goes back into the direction north. As I'm heading in that direction towards the swamp, I hear a huge sound behind me, probably about 30 yards away. Whatever it was had to have been large, because I hear this large force coming down from the sky. It was the sound of wind being moved. It stopped me in my tracks, and I turned. This is what I saw, and I kid you not, I am not crazy. Plain as day, this massive bird, I don't know what you would call it, because I only saw it for about a second or two before it descended and ascended again. From the glimpse I got, it kind of looked like an eagle, but it was all black with white markings along its wings and back that I had never seen before. That's not what shook me. It was the sheer size and what it did that took my breath away. The wingspan on this monster had to have been easily 20 feet in length if it was standing on the ground, and I'm probably being conservative. This bird was probably 10 to 12 feet tall if standing. I mean it when I said this was a massive animal. It was so large that as it descended out into the sky, it made an audible noise. I turned and saw it descending right as I was about to go to the ground, and then I realized it was doing something. It had its sights set on this large alligator that was sitting right there on the embankment, on the opposite side that I was, near a large tree. It descended, and with its massive talons, grabbed this alligator in one swift motion, picked it up with its talons, and flew off, just like that. It was like watching a hawk grab a field mouse and then take off. It was nothing to this bird, or whatever it was. It didn't even look like the alligator that got grabbed had even any time to react. In just 1 second, it got scooped up and then gone. To give you some more detail about the environment, even though it was all bog and swamp, there was enough sky opening in this part of the swamp that the bird was easily able to navigate down from the sky into. It wasn't so thick and covered that it made it impossible or tough for this bird to fly out of. It was very open, with lots of sun coming through. The bird itself didn't make any noise like squawks or screams, kind of like what you'd expect, but it was moving so much faster, and so much so that it was audible. It's kind of like if you take a stick and start waving it really fast, you'll start hearing that whipping sound in the air. That's just from you moving around. It was kind of the same thing, if that makes any sense. It all happened so fast that I nearly soiled my pants as this happened. And that moment, I gave up any and all hope that I would find any remote fishing spot safely, and took off quickly back to my truck, parked a couple of miles in the direction I was heading. It really did terrify me, and it kind of stopped my adventuring out in places that I don't necessarily know too well. I don't know what it was. I don't know what kind of birds naturally live out in the swamp. Whatever this was, though, took down an alligator like it was nothing. And let me clarify this with you. The alligator that it grabbed wasn't a small 3-foot gator. This was a decent-sized 6 to 7 foot length adult alligator. I don't know if you'll believe my story, and I was even hesitant to write this up and send it to you, but I figured it's worth a shot. Sometimes I feel like it's a burden to keep this on me and not tell anybody about it. I've asked friends and family if they know of any large birds that live out in the swamps, or any birds that eat alligators, and I'm just responded to with strange looks. I still feel uncomfortable telling my story to people, in fear of rejection. I think I'll get over it eventually, and I know for me, typing this out to you and processing what happened is helping me work through it. It was just such a surreal experience. I don't think I'll ever fully process it all. I know skinwalkers and shapeshifters are a very common theme in Navajo culture and tradition, but I've had friends in multiple tribes and have been all over the US, and the whole shapeshifter tale has been a common, reoccurring theme throughout many tribes, even in some parts of Canada that are more remote. Before I go on, I'm a crypto researcher, and so I've been able to make friends in many places. The stories I've gotten here have been incredible, and I really appreciate what you're doing on your channel by spreading the truth about these things being out there. Not just shapeshifters, all of them. Today, I wanted to share some shapeshifter accounts with you, since you do so many skinwalker-based stories. I'm sure you are familiar with what they are, who they are, and that they are strongly rooted in Navajo legend. While their intentions might be evil, they still have the tendency to abuse shape-shifting for the common end goal of black magic. A friend of mine who I've gotten to know over the years, who happens to be a mix of a few tribes, but is strongly Sioux. His grandfather and forefathers had tales of old men, hermits actually, that would live alone in the woods. Anytime they were ever approached by opposing tribes or people they didn't know, they would shapeshift into a deer, a bird, or even a wolf. Now, the skinwalkers in Navajo culture would primarily shapeshift into coyotes for the sake of instilling fear and harm on individuals. These shapeshifters were different. I'm not sure the type of magic they would practice, but it wasn't necessarily nefarious. These hermits wanted to be left alone and would shapeshift whatever they needed to be to avoid human contact. This is more common than you think. As this friend of mine explained to me, there were several tales from his tribe of multiple hermits and people doing this. Of course, they had their fair share of black magic practices, who also shapeshifted to instill fear and malevolent gain. I feel like that's just a part of life. Some people are good, and some people are evil. What interested me the most is that there is so much shapeshifting lore in many of these people's cultures. For the longest time, I gained friends in other tribes. I was stuck to my belief that it was just a Navajo exclusive thing. Now, I know different. Another friend of mine, who I became very close with when I was going on several different Bigfoot expeditions down in Southern California, is from a tribe down there. If you do decide to use this and record this, and he is listening, forgive me, for I forget the name of their tribe. But he told me about what he was as a very young boy, that there was a pack of ravenous wolves that came in and invaded their small village and killed several men, women, and children. This pack of ravenous wolves was actually a small band of evil shapeshifters that would shapeshift into wolves to rape, steal, and kill. It was said that this small band of shapeshifters were evil men that were cast out of other tribes and villages for the evil deeds they committed to others. So basically, a small group of bandits that were shapeshifters. They were later captured and burned alive. Their remains were scattered and dumped into the rivers from what I was told, doing a sacred ritual, a cleansing ritual. The man who told me about this is in his 70s, possibly older, but because of his culture, they are usually in very great health and of sound mind. Many of their people don't make up stories for the purpose of notoriety. They have nothing to gain out of it, no incentive to feed me made-up stories. He can remember them being burned alive as he witnessed it as just a young boy. This same man can also recall an elder when he was a boy who had left the tribe to go live in isolation. This older man also shapeshifted, but kept it a secret. He would often come and keep an eye on the village to protect it in the form of a bird. He said the bird would come, or the old man, and would watch over the children, the tribe's most vulnerable. The reason for this elder leaving the tribe to go live in isolation was that he was going to go and die by himself, but in reality, he had to hide his powers in some way. Personally, I don't know too much about that particular story because he didn't go into great detail. This is also a gentleman that I got the pleasure of sitting down with and discussing with him other findings I've received of other tribes, like Sioux and Navajo. I think the biggest thing he was surprised to hear is that there is so much magic that is practiced in other tribes and cultures. Growing up in the area, he had very little contact, if any, with any other tribes, let alone neighboring tribes. Information like this was new to him. These were not by far the craziest stories I've ever been told about shapeshifting. Years back, I was told about a few warriors from a tribe on the East Coast who would shapeshift and hunt large predators to store back plenty of food for the winter. I don't know if they would do this in secrecy or if it was common knowledge among their tribe of people. Apparently, this particular tribe went through a really bad period of famine and turned to magic to feed their people. Only the strongest and wisest warriors among the tribe were hand-selected to learn these secrets to provide food for their entire tribe. They would shapeshift into bears or wolves from what I would gather and would go hunt those same animals. They would come back with even more abundant amounts of food to feed their tribe for the entire winter. Going back to Navajo and their culture, I've gotten to listen to many accounts and witness stories of skinwalkers, some far more terrifying than you could ever imagine. I've also heard of good skinwalkers, if that even makes sense. These are skinwalkers that were, I would call, rogue walkers. They were once evil and still maintained their demonic power, but decided to place that power out on other skinwalkers. Meaning, they wouldn't prey on innocent people any longer, but instead took their revenge out on other skinwalkers who preyed upon good people. I guess even after converting to the dark, some people can have a drastic change of heart. In the land of Navajo, whom I've also acquired many friends throughout the years, have expressed their concern for the unnatural animals that they've seen out there. They believe these to also be shapeshifters, but not necessarily skinwalkers. See, skinwalkers primarily take the form of coyotes and other animals, but I do know for a fact that it's mainly coyotes and other grotesque forms. They believe there's other shapeshifters at large that aren't exactly skinwalkers. They have reported seeing very large black panther-like cats roaming around, with evil intentions, scaring and chasing those who come across them. They are demonic and to be warded away, I was told. They've also encountered pitch-black grizzly-sized bears out in the middle of the night, something I hadn't heard of until a few family members came to me with their own sightings and stories. Thinking logically, there are of course black bears in most parts of the US, to my knowledge. But when they go and use descriptions talking about their gargantuan size and ill intention, it really sets me in a bad place. This tells me there are far more than just skinwalkers out and about, but some who enlist the use of dark magic to aid them has many possibilities on their ability to harm individuals. The grizzly-sized bears they've been seeing also have distinct markings on them, having more humanoid features. Having either a panther or a large evil bear running after your car down the highway at night is equally terrifying, especially when they can keep up with you at 70 to 80 miles an hour. You know there is something bad at work there. An ex-reservation officer I had the pleasure of meeting spoke to me about how there was a smaller family that lived in the outskirts of the res many years ago that had been murdered apparently. Their bodies were then dragged out to the middle of the desert and feasted upon. When they were found by the reservation police, there wasn't much left of them. They weren't devoured on by coyotes either, or birds. The chunks of meat taken out of them were large and still had bite marks on the intact parts of their leftover bodies. They attributed this to shapeshifters. This wasn't the only time this happened either. Throughout his time there as an officer, he had been witness to other bizarre happenings that were very similar. Driving at night, responding to a call, and seeing a grown man running on the highway next to his police vehicle doing 60 miles an hour. A grown man running on all fours and then turning into a wolf before his very eyes. This man has had to defend himself with his firearm against these things. One time in particular, he shot at this massive panther that attacked him when he was off duty. It nearly killed him just before he could fire off a few good shots at it and drove it away. This officer explained that shapeshifters have a few distinct features about them that you'll know it's them. The first being is that they have a human look to their faces, even if they have fully shifted into an animal. The second is that they will have various markings or scars along their body or face. The markings comment is probably one of the first few times I've heard that, but that's what he said from his experiences. This man has had his fair share of dancing with death from these beings alone. The worst, he said, were the bears, because of how much damage they would cause to people, structures, and carcasses. This kind of stuff happens far more often than we would all like to believe. When you're cozy in a little suburban neighborhood, at work at your bank or store, you never have to think about these things. These aren't real problems for us, but for these people, it's a life-threatening thing they have to deal with constantly and consistently. Even if these people aren't dealing with the evil persons who abuse magic to use this, shape-shifting is still very much a part of their culture and who they are as people. Some tribes it's more sacred than others. Stories and opinions will vary greatly depending on where you travel to and what tribe you speak to. I'll do what I can to gather up more stories for you and share them. I was around 22 to 23 years old when this happened. I'm a woman living in Southeast Asia, and around here, witch doctors and witchcraft is widely known. When somebody says they went to a witch doctor to get healed, it was acceptable, and people just nodded unless they're a skeptic themselves, which is rare. With that said, there was a lot of belief in the supernatural and curses in this area. There was a time where my girlfriend used to somewhat live at our house days at a time. She would go home on weekends to get new clothes and come right back. Her family situation was bad, and getting her out of there eases the stress on both of us. In our house stayed my mom, little sister, our maid who had been with us since I was in high school, and then me and my girlfriend. When our maid was new to us, she was attentive, the type who handed us drinks on a saucer plate or coaster if available. And she probably thought we were a snob family, unlike her last, which was untrue, as we were still a casual middle type family. In our country, maids or domestic helpers are very common, and you don't have to be that rich to afford their services. And most maids are stay-in, which was the case for ours. She's an unmarried woman, around her late 30s, and based from the years of observation and experience with her, she's a spiteful woman. She's manipulative to everyone by saying that, "Your mom told me that you should," or "She said that," then something that she wanted you to do or believe. She's never taking responsibility or blame for anything she's ever said if the other person didn't tell her, or tell her others' command or sentence. This caused a lot of problems between me and my mom, before that almost led to me to kill myself. I was almost successful if the belt didn't get loose from the tie I made. It was that bad. But she still does this to this day, using the name of another person to do her bidding. Don't ask me why she's still with us. If I have the power to choose, she had been long gone. But my mother is too nice, and her argument is, at least she's not a thief. We can deal with her attitude. Our maid also lies a lot to my aunt, who lives next door. She tells them stories of how my girlfriend asks her to wash her dirty laundry, which was false, because we don't want to ask her to do that, as to not get any bad rep in the first place, because we know that she would say things like these. But she did anyway, along with other lies that my girlfriend eats our food, empty the fridge, and stuff like that. And, stupidly enough, my aunt believed her. This caused my aunt to give a scolding to my girlfriend that made her confidence and self-esteem go down even more, and she was already suffering enough with depression and anxiety. When the opportunity came for my girlfriend to get a job, she took it. At first, the workplace was near our home, so the commute was okay, but then they got relocated to a city about 2 hours away and even farther from her own home. So again, she opted to stay at my place because it was closer. Of course, our maid didn't like that at all, because it was another person to serve in her mind. Not sure why though, as we mostly kept to ourselves beside the food prep. My girlfriend, let's call her L, has diagnosed mild depression and anxiety, but her anxiety was at peak at this point, and this was the time I got a lot of phone calls from emergency services and ambulances to pick her up because she was panicking, hyperventilating, crying, and fighting to escape the paramedics. A part of her anxiety was she could never be around a crowd or near a stranger, as she was scared they would suddenly hurt her. One time, she was held up at a train station control room because the train she was in was packed and had a breakdown. She attempted to end it all and jump in the tracks, and everyone there didn't know what to do. I went and picked her up and called her manager to let her know she won't be coming to work that day. She went to work once and got a termination letter that same day. She went home crying and panicking as she told me that. The exit interview as per company procedures scheduled a few days after never happened, as we waited with her, me and a friend at the office. The person that was conducting the interview said the meeting was at 11 p.m., and we got there at 10, as we didn't want to be late. A few hours went by and we kept asking the lady behind the desk if the person was there, and she said that it was, but in a meeting or some sort. So okay. We waited a few more hours, but when it reached 3 a.m., we had had enough, and Elle's anxiety was peaking. We left the office without speaking to the interviewer. Elle tried to jump from the 3rd floor that night, and we held her back. It was her anger issue and anxiety kicking in. By the time we got out of the building, she was hyperventilating, and guards patrolling the area thought she was on drugs, as she was curling on the floor, having an attack. I told them to stay away, as she needed the space to calm down. They did, and left us be. We were also back and forth to the mental institutions for a meeting with the psychologist and restock on her meds. This happened twice every month, and the psychologist recommended for her to get an evaluation exam to determine her mental state. The hospital was a public one, and the wait for the exam was 3 months long unless she paid a hefty amount and you could schedule it within a week. Well, we didn't have the money, so we opted to wait. The day of the exam came, and she was staying at her house that time, so I messaged her, asking if she was at the hospital. She said she was and was doing okay, so it eased my worry. But she sent a picture of trees and nature, and what seems to be an area. I asked her where she was, and she said she was at the hospital again, but elaborated a different kind of hospital. She was at the province at a house of a witch doctor who took her in. I was livid. Not because she was at a witch doctor, but because we waited months for the exam, and on the day itself, she chose to ditch it and lie to me about it. She said the witch doctor was helping her heal from her depression and anxiety, and that mostly of her anxiety was caused by, you guessed it, our maid. I didn't find it unbelievable, as our maid came from an area where the low-class lives that came from a provincial region where it was well known for witchcraft. And our maid even shouted threats at her at one point, where we were about to leave the house for the day, and suddenly, out of nowhere, started cursing at her. No triggers or anything. I told my mother everything before we went, and demanded she got fired by the time we come home. Later that day, I got a lot of calls and texts from our maid, begging me for forgiveness. Never forgave her, and to this day, we were at a Cold War situation. So yeah, I do believe that our maid was responsible for her anxiety because until now, I never saw her having a panic attack again, except for the general anxiety of a normal person. Elle said that the witch doctor advised her to never return to our area, as there were a lot of these black magic practitioners, and her curse would return. She took it to heart and never returned to our place, so I just went over to hers. Fine by me, as long as there's no more emergency calls. We haven't been back to the psychologist or bought meds anymore after healing either. One day though, Elle told us to go visit the witch doctor with her. So me, my cousin, Elle's friend who instructed her and introduced her to the witch doctor, his friend, Elle's brother and sister, all packed in a car, went to this area for a visit. I thought it was just your typical witch doctor visit, though I have been to a few before where I would go with my grandfather and waited outside. But this time it was different. Much more different. We got there, a rural area with trees all over, with a few houses in between. It wasn't scary or creepy, just an average setting where you can see farm animals freely walking in a fenced property. The house was also normal, but not well paved, but more modern than bamboos and wood together. And the witch doctor was a nice person. I would not go into details about them, because it is against the rule to tell specifics, as there are a lot of bad persons, entities, and black witches who can go after them. Anyway, they just talked, but they were talking like they were possessed by another person or being. I forgot to say, but I am deadly afraid of witch doctors, or faith healers by the way, simply because of the fact that they are so real. So I just pretended to be okay and stood there, listening and watching the scene before me. Elle's sister and me occasionally glanced at each other to silently ask, "Do you believe them?" I gave her a shrug, as I do not want to disrespect any of them in their own territory. In the midst of their talk, they would casually bring up that they were hurting somewhere, and the witch doctor would do hand movements on that body part and pretend to stab something in the air, and the person said the pain was gone. I still stood there and pretended everything was normal, like the other in the room. Even if I wanted to leave the place, I couldn't, because we only had one ride and it was dark outside. I didn't know they were planning to stay the night. Then, the healing began. I forgot who the first to go, but everybody went through it, except my skeptic cousin. The witch doctor held a normal pen between your fingers, be it your toe or your hands, and circled it in the same spot, as they held the two fingers close with the pen in between. This was to cast the evil spirit out and reveal itself. I went out of the room because I was afraid that my energy or fear would make them fail the ritual, like how those who are afraid of the devil should leave the immediate area in case of a transfer possession. Suddenly, Elle told the witch doctor that I was possessed by something. Not possessed in an exorcist kind of way, but more like something is attached to me and that I needed the help. Now I was shocked because this wasn't part of the plan. It felt as a surprise healing, like the surprise overnight to that place. I felt like myself and wasn't depressed or anything, perfectly normal in my mind, so I'm not entirely sure why she thought I needed help. Was it my PTSD? It was very sudden, and I wasn't prepared. Let me clarify. I don't drink, smoke, or take drugs. None of us had a drink that night either, so everybody was sober. I didn't know what else to do but comply, lest they think that I'm actually possessed if I refuse the healing. That would make things worse. So I sat there, doctor holding my foot with a pen between the big toe and the one next to it, holding it close around the pen. Elle held my right hand and they began to circle the pen. It hurts a lot, and the more they did it, the more it hurt, as actual blisters form on the skin around the pen. It was hell. I thrashed around and cried, trying to break free from the torture. Everyone in the room except Elle's sister held me down, on my legs, my arms and shoulders, as if I fought with all my strength. All while the doctor shouted questions at me, or well to tell the entity attached to me. This is where it gets hazy, as the pain was intolerable. They asked me questions like, "Who are you? What do you want with her? Why did you abuse her?" And to make it worse, I still don't feel different from my normal self. At this point, I prayed that whoever possessing me would actually take over and endure this if they were real. But there was none. It was only me and a bunch of people holding me down as the doctor continued the torture. To make it all stop, I answered with the first words that came to my mind as I shouted and cried. This seemed to make them calm down, and to my relief, the ritual eventually ended. Everybody drew a breath of relief as they cast the evil entity out, except for my cousin and Elle's sister. I later talked to her and found out that she felt the same, just answered all the same questions to get out of the situation. I think she also had a trauma about it, the same as I did. I had a big open blister between my toes, caused by the pen, and they left me alone after that. I avoided going back into the room and stayed around the living area until they decided to sleep in another room. I too went to sleep. In the morning, as I was anxious to go home, waiting outside the house for them was taking too long, and I eventually went inside the car to cry myself out. The shame and anger overtook me, and I bawled while they were taking their sweet time bidding farewell. The doctor's questions that night was really intrusive, and I basically shouted shameful words regarding the cause of my PTSD to everybody in the room, including the ones who didn't know about it. And no, it did not heal my PTSD. I still have it, and will probably for the rest of my life, and the experience didn't help me deal with it either. It just became another trauma. It was the most humiliating experience of my life so far. The only good thing about it was that Elle sort of found her peace in it, and helps her deal with day to day, and she's a better person now. They continue to remain in contact, but as for me, I do not want to go inside that house anymore, as they might conduct another healing ritual on me. I don't mind what her beliefs are, if they help her, but please, leave me out of it.